It started, as it always did, with a polite demand disguised as family concern. My home, my life, suddenly reassigned at the dinner table. They thought I was their safety net. Their solution. They expected me to absorb another crisis. To just say yes. But they didn't know one crucial thing. What happens when the person you've always counted on quietly changes all the rules? And who exactly would be waiting when they came to collect? My name is Lena Sterling, I'm 30 years old, and I work as a lead data analyst for a tech company that values precision and order above all else. It's a philosophy I've adopted for my own life, meticulously curating an existence of quiet efficiency within the walls of my city apartment. This space, purchased with years of disciplined saving and late-night project work, is my sanctuary, a minimalist haven where every object has a purpose and every evening promises a gentle unwinding from the day's complexities. The soft glow of my reading lamp, the organized calm of my bookshelves, the aroma of a single, perfectly brewed cup of herbal tea, these are the small, deliberate joys that form the bedrock of my contentment. I've learned that true luxury isn't about excess, but about the profound peace that comes from intentional living, a peace I guard fiercely. My meticulously crafted peace often feels like a fortress built on a fault line, a serene landscape under the constant, subtle threat of seismic shifts from the outside world, particularly from those who share my bloodline. Do you know that deeply unsettling feeling, when the calm you've painstakingly built is perpetually at risk of being shattered by external dramas? I'd genuinely love to hear your own story of carving out and defending your sanctuary in the comments below. Perhaps we can share strategies for reinforcing those walls. It's a peculiar kind of vigilance, living this way, always half listening for the tremors that signal an impending demand. To my family, my stability isn't seen as the hard-won result of personal discipline and sacrifice. It's perceived more as an abundant, renewable resource, a community well from which they can freely draw. I am Lena, the sensible one, the one who always has her affairs in order, and therefore, the one who can, and should, absorb the overflow of chaos from their lives. It's an unspoken role, assigned to me so early I can barely recall a time before. Its weight settled on my shoulders. They don't see the late nights, the foregone luxuries, the careful planning, they only see the calm surface, mistaking it for an effortless, inexhaustible supply of solutions. My younger sister, Chloe, is a whirlwind of artistic temperament and fleeting passions, 2 years my junior but perpetually adrift in a sea of her own making. She has a remarkable talent for turning minor setbacks into operatic tragedies, each one requiring an immediate, full-scale rescue operation. Another brilliant business idea that fizzled after the initial investment, another apartment lease broken due to creative differences with roommates, another essential bill unexpectedly overlooked. Chloe possesses an almost magical ability to externalize responsibility, painting herself as the perpetually misunderstood victim of circumstance, a narrative our parents readily accept. Mark and Sarah, my parents, are well-intentioned, I believe. But their love for Chloe often manifests as a relentless campaign of enabling. They listen to her tales of woe with unwavering sympathy, their brows furrowed with concern, before inevitably turning their gaze towards me. Lena, you're so capable, they'd say, their voices laced with a gentle expectation that always felt heavier than any direct order. You've always been the strong one, you can help Chloe get back on her feet, just this once more. That once more became a recurring decimal in the equation of my life, a constant variable I was expected to solve. I remember with stark clarity when I was 24, just starting to gain traction in my career, diligently saving for a down payment on this very apartment. Chloe had, with characteristic impulsiveness, invested a significant sum, borrowed, of course, into a guaranteed success, artisanal kombucha pop-up with a boyfriend she'd known for 3 weeks. When it inevitably collapsed, along with the relationship, the creditors came calling. My parents called me, their voices strained with anxiety, not for my sister's poor judgment, but for the terrible stress this was causing her. I ended up draining nearly half my savings to cover her debts, a silent, unacknowledged sacrifice that set my own goals back by almost 2 years. There was no thank you, just a relieved sigh from my mother and Chloe's breezy assurance that she'd learned Her lesson, a lesson that seemed to require remedial classes every few months. So, when my mother's name flashed on my phone screen the previous Tuesday, her tone unnervingly cheerful, inviting me to a cozy family dinner that coming Sunday, a familiar sense of premonition settled in my stomach. These impromptu gatherings were rarely just about sharing a meal. They were meticulously staged events, designed to create an atmosphere of familial warmth that would make any refusal on my part seem churlish, almost cruel. There was an art to their requests, a subtle emotional leverage they'd perfected over decades, and I knew, with a weary certainty, that this dinner would be no different. The over-solicitous questions about my well-being, the compliments on my resilience, it was all part of the preamble. But something had shifted within me over the past few years, a quiet hardening of resolve forged in the crucible of countless such emergencies. It wasn't bitterness that had taken root, but a profound, unshakable understanding that my self-preservation was not selfishness, but a necessity. I had slowly, almost imperceptibly, begun to build internal boundaries, invisible fortifications against the emotional incursions that had once left me depleted and resentful. I had learned that usefulness, when endlessly exploited, becomes a cage, and I was no longer willing to be its prisoner. The strong one, I realized, also had the right to be the protected one, even if that protection had to come from herself. The call from my mother was textbook. "Lena, darling, how are you? We miss you terribly. We were thinking, just a small, intimate dinner on Sunday? Chloe will be there." My father's voice in the background, a cheerful echo. The sweetness in her voice was a little too saccharine, a little too deliberate, like a carefully applied veneer over a much rougher, more demanding truth. I agreed, my voice betraying none of the weariness I felt, because I knew what was coming, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of calm, the calm of someone who has already decided on their course of action, long before the storm makes landfall. Arriving at my parents' house that Sunday, the air was thick with a rehearsed normalcy. My father, Mark, greeted me with an overly enthusiastic hug, his eyes slightly evasive. My mother, Sarah, fussed over me, complimenting an outfit I'd worn a dozen times before, her smile a little too bright, a little too fixed. Chloe was already at the table, scrolling listlessly through her phone, a picture of put-upon innocence, occasionally sighing with a theatricality that suggested deep, unspoken burdens. The stage was set, the actors in place, and I, the unwitting lead in their recurring drama, was about to be handed my script. We navigated through the salad course with the forced pleasantries, my mother praising the unseasonably warm weather, my father meticulously refilling his water glass, Chloe picking at her food with the air of a condemned prisoner. Then, as the main course was cleared, Sarah placed her fork down with a delicate clink, folded her hands on the table, and bestowed upon me that specific, practiced smile, the one reserved for requests she knew were impositions, wrapped in the silken ribbon of guilt. "Lena, dear," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial softness, "we've been so worried about Chloe. She's had such a difficult time lately, and well, after a lot of discussion, we think it's best. She's going to come and stay with you for a while. Just until she gets properly settled." They didn't ask, they informed. It was presented not as a request to be considered, but as a foregone conclusion, a minor logistical detail in their grand plan for Chloe's perpetual rescue. The silence that followed was charged, expectant. They were waiting for my token resistance, the sigh of reluctant acquiescence they'd grown so accustomed to. Chloe looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before quickly looking away. My father cleared his throat, bracing for the usual negotiation. Instead, I offered a serene smile, meeting my mother's gaze directly. "Of course," I said, my voice light, almost airy. "If it helps Chloe find her footing, I don't see why not." The surprise on their faces was palpable, a collective intake of breath. They thought I'd finally, truly, caved. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ascertain, was that the apartment they envisioned Chloe inhabiting, my sanctuary, was already an echo, a memory I had quietly, and very deliberately, left behind weeks ago. My usefulness had finally reached its expiration date. The decision to sell my apartment, my sanctuary, hadn't been a sudden impulse. It was the culmination of years of quiet erosions, a slow dawning that my home, the one place I was supposed to feel unequivocally safe and in control, was, in their eyes, merely an extension of their own resources. It was the place stable Lena lived, which meant it was, by default, available space for any family overflow. The realization crystallized one rainy Tuesday evening. I was curled up with a book. The city lights a soft blur beyond my window when Chloe called, her voice a frantic whisper. She'd had a misunderstanding with her latest landlord, something about unauthorized pets and unpaid utilities, and needed a place to crash, just for a few days, Lena, I swear, until I sort things out. Those few days, I knew from bitter experience, would stretch into weeks, possibly months, my routine disrupted, my peace fractured, my home no longer my own. That night, staring at my own front door, a profound sense of alienation washed over me. This door, which I had so proudly painted a calming shade of teal, no longer felt like a barrier against the world, but a perpetually unlocked gate for family crises. Every possession, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, suddenly felt provisional, subject to their needs. The mortgage I paid, the bills I managed, the order I maintained, none of it rendered the space truly mine when their expectations could override my ownership at any moment. The phrase, "You're lucky, you can help," had morphed from a plea into an entitlement, a silent annex to the deed of my property. It was then, with a chilling clarity, that I understood, as long as they knew where to find me, and as long as I possessed anything they deemed useful, I would never truly be free. My apartment wasn't just a physical space, it was a symbol of my enmeshment. The next morning, I contacted a realtor, a discreet professional recommended by a colleague. The process was surprisingly swift, almost clinical. I stipulated a quiet sale, no dramatic for sale signs, no open houses advertised to the world. I wanted to slip away, not stage a rebellion. Within 3 weeks, an offer was accepted, a young couple eager to start their lives in the city. The paperwork was signed, the keys handed over, all with a strange sense of detachment. I moved my essentials into a smaller, charmingly imperfect rental apartment on the far side of the city, a neighborhood they wouldn't think to look in, under a new, unlisted number. I didn't tell them. Not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for self-preservation. Sometimes, when you're drowning in other people's expectations, the only way to find air is to disappear from their immediate grasp, just enough to learn how to breathe on your own again. The week following that fateful Sunday dinner was a masterclass in their assumptions. Texts began to arrive on Monday, a cheerful barrage of logistical planning from my mother. Frank, my father, can help Chloe move her mattress on Saturday morning, don't worry about a thing, followed by, she's so excited to finally have a calm space to think, Lena. This will be so good for her. Each message was a small, sharp pinprick against my resolve, a reminder of the invisible chains I was trying to break. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say to a version of me that had ceased to exist, a me who would passively rearrange her life to accommodate their latest directive. They were conducting a conversation with a ghost, planning an invasion of a territory I no longer held. By Wednesday, a subtle note of impatience had crept into my mother's messages. Lena, just checking if you need me to come over and help clear out a closet for Chloe? She has quite a few things. The implication was clear, my space, my belongings, were secondary to Chloe's needs. Then, on Thursday, a text that made me laugh, a short, mirthless sound in the quiet of my new, anonymous kitchen. Chloe says she'll bring her own eco-friendly cleaning supplies, she doesn't want to be a burden. Chloe, who considered rinsing a coffee cup a Herculean effort, was now an avatar of domestic responsibility. I let the messages pile up, unanswered, unacknowledged. I didn't argue, I didn't correct, I didn't engage. I simply waited, a silent observer of their meticulously laid, yet utterly misguided, plans. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. I rose early, not with the dread that usually accompanied their impending arrivals, but with a strange, almost illicit sense of lightness. I made coffee, strong and black, and drove, not towards my old neighborhood, but away from it, towards the sprawling weekend farmers market across town. I wandered through stalls overflowing with vibrant produce and artisanal cheeses, the cheerful cacophony of vendors and shoppers a soothing balm. I bought nothing, my purpose not acquisition but immersion in a world far removed from their drama. I found a sun-drenched bench and simply sat, letting the warmth seep into my skin, my phone silent in my bag. It was a deliberate act of reclaiming my time, my Saturday, my life. Around 11, my phone, which I'd finally placed on the table beside me, began to vibrate. A missed call from Mom. Then another. A voicemail notification popped up. I let it go. The fourth call, I answered, my voice carefully neutral. Lena? It was my mother, but the saccharine sweetness was gone, replaced by a brittle edge of confusion that was rapidly escalating towards panic. Lena, what on earth is going on? We're here, at the condo. There's someone here, a man. He says he lives here. He says you moved out. He says he doesn't know any Lena Sterling. Her voice cracked on my name, a mixture of disbelief and dawning fury. I let the silence stretch, a deliberate pause, wanting her to feel the chasm, the abrupt absence of the certainty she'd always taken for granted. I pictured them on the familiar porch, Chloe's boxes piled on the walkway, their faces shifting from smug expectation to bewildered indignation. You didn't tell us, she finally snapped, the accusation sharp. You never said a single word about moving. Her voice was rising, and I could hear my father's agitated muttering in the background, Chloe's whine of, what's happening? No, I replied, my voice even, calm. I didn't. No one asked where I lived, so I didn't think it was important to share. The line went quiet for a beat, the only sound there sharp, indrawn breaths and the rustle of what I imagined were bags being shifted impatiently. They had meticulously planned an occupation, only to arrive at a castle that had long since changed hands, its drawbridge firmly up. But the chapter of their surprise, and my quiet liberation, was far from over. Their determination, I knew, would lead them on a new hunt. My father's voice, rough with indignation, finally cut through the stunned silence on the other end of the phone. You lied to us, Lena. At dinner, you said she could move in. You explicitly said yes. His accusation, so predictable, so typical of their selective hearing, almost made me smile. They heard what they wanted to hear, what fit their narrative of my perpetual compliance. No, Dad, I corrected, my tone still maddeningly placid, a stark contrast to their rising agitation. I said, if it helps Erin get back on her feet, I don't see why not. I never specified where she could attempt to get back on her feet. And certainly not in a property I no longer owned. I could almost hear the gears grinding in their heads as they tried to reconcile my words with their unwavering assumptions. There was another pause, longer this time, filled with a static that crackled with unspoken fury and dawning comprehension. Then, Chloe's voice, no longer the put-upon victim, but petulant and demanding. So, what now, Lena? What are we supposed to do? Just stand here with all my stuff? Are you going to help us or not? The raw entitlement in her tone was astounding. Even now, faced with the undeniable truth that I had orchestrated a life change without their input or permission, her immediate concern was her own inconvenience, her own thwarted plans. The expectation that I would somehow magically resolve the situation they had created by their presumptuousness was still firmly in place. For a fleeting moment, the old reflex to soothe, to solve, flickered within me. But it died as quickly as it arose, extinguished by the cold, hard resolve I had cultivated. I simply said, that sounds like a problem you'll need to figure out, Chloe, and before they could unleash the next barrage of accusations or demands, I ended the call. The silence that followed in my small, new kitchen was profound, broken only by the gentle hum of my own refrigerator, a sound of pure, unadulterated peace. I knew, with a certainty born of decades of experience, that this wouldn't be the end of it. My mother, Sarah, possessed a tenacity that, if applied to her own life challenges, could have moved mountains. Instead, it was primarily deployed in the service of managing her children's lives, particularly Chloe's, and ensuring my continued participation in that management. She wouldn't let this go. She would dig, she would call distant relatives, she would activate her network of neighborhood gossips. She would find me. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. And a part of me, the part that was tired of running, tired of hiding, almost welcomed the inevitable confrontation. It was time to stop disappearing and start defending the territory I had claimed. As predicted, by late afternoon, as the sun began to cast long shadows across my unfamiliar living room floor, the knock came. Not a tentative inquiry, but 3 sharp, impatient raps on the door, the kind that signaled irritation barely held in check by a veneer of forced politeness. I looked through the peephole. There they were, my mother, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly, my father, his jaw tight, his arms crossed defensively over his chest. And Chloe, standing slightly behind them, a thunderous expression on her face, surrounded by a small mountain of her precious boxes and bags piled on the narrow landing. They looked like a conquering army that had, after a minor navigational error, finally located the correct fortress to lay siege to. I opened the door, not wide, but enough to establish my presence, my ownership of this new, unviolated space. You found me, I stated, my voice flat, devoid of surprise or welcome. My mother's eyes scanned the unfamiliar hallway behind me, her expression a mixture of fury and a strange, proprietary offense, as if I'd betrayed her by choosing a home she hadn't pre-approved. We tried calling, Lena, she said, her voice tight, strained. We didn't think you'd actually ignore us. We were worried. Worried about their plans being derailed, I mentally corrected, not about my well-being. It's my apartment, I replied simply, letting the statement hang in the air, a clear demarcation of territory. My father stepped forward, his voice rising. The carefully constructed dam of his composure finally breaking. But you said, Lena. You said she could move in. We've driven all over the city, dragged all her things. And now you're standing there acting like we're imposing, like we're strangers. The sheer audacity of his victimhood was breathtaking. They were the ones who had presumed, who had demanded, who had attempted to dictate the terms of my life and my living arrangements, yet somehow, in their narrative, I was the one causing the problem. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't mirror their agitation. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, envisioning their outrage, their arguments, their attempts at emotional blackmail. I never said she could move in here, I reiterated. My gaze steady. I said, and I quote, if it helps Erin get back on her feet, I don't see why not. That conversation took place regarding the old apartment. The one, if you recall, that I no longer inhabit and no longer own. This, I gestured vaguely to the space behind me, is an entirely different, and entirely private, residence. Chloe, unable to contain her indignation any longer, pushed past my father, her cheeks flushed a deep, angry red. This is ridiculous, Lena. It's petty, and it's cruel. You always have to act like you're so much better than everyone, so above it all. But this? This is just mean. Her voice cracked with a theatrical tremor, the accusation of cruelty a well-worn weapon in her arsenal, designed to trigger my guilt, my ingrained desire to be seen as kind and accommodating. I tilted my head, considering her words, her flushed face, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from her. Let me see if I understand this correctly, Chloe, I said, my voice deceptively soft. You packed up your entire life, or at least what fits into those boxes, convinced my parents to act as your personal moving service, and drove across the city with the full intention of occupying someone else's private property, an apartment whose continued availability you didn't even bother to confirm. And I'm the one being cruel? That isn't cruelty you're experiencing, Chloe. That's a collision with reality, a direct consequence of your own assumptions and your profound sense of entitlement. Her face crumpled, not with remorse, but with fury. "You're my sister," she choked out, as if that familial bond was a universal key, granting her unrestricted access to my life, my resources, my home. "Yes," I agreed, my voice still cool, still measured. "I am. And you, along with our parents, have spent years, no, decades, confusing that biological fact with a free pass for indefinite cohabitation, financial bailouts, and emotional labor. The terms of that arrangement, however, have just been unilaterally and permanently revised by me." My father stepped between us then, his face a mask of grim disapproval, his voice low and laced with a warning tone that had once made me shrink. "That's enough, Lena. We're not leaving. We have put up with a lot from you, with your moods, your distance. You owe your sister this. You owe us." There it was. The unspoken word, the invisible ledger they had been keeping all these years. Every act of assistance I had ever provided, not a gift, but a down payment on some future, unspecified obligation. Every sacrifice, every late-night rescue, every quietly absorbed financial blow, all meticulously recorded, not as acts of love or familial support, but as debts accruing interest. I took a deliberate step back, further into the sanctuary of my own hallway, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened between us. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. My mother's eyes narrowed, suspicion dawning. "What are you doing, Lena?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a new, unfamiliar anxiety. I didn't answer. I simply unlocked the screen, my fingers moving with a calm precision that belied the frantic beating of my own heart. I dialed the 3 numbers I had hoped I would never have to use against my own family. As the call connected, I met their stunned, disbelieving gazes. 911, what is your emergency? A calm, professional voice asked on the other end. My voice, when I replied, was equally calm, equally professional. Yes, I have several individuals outside my apartment who are trespassing. They are refusing to leave my property. They are not on the lease, they were not invited, and I have repeatedly asked them to depart. The shock on their faces was a picture. But it was the satisfying click of the tumblers of justice falling into place that resonated most deeply within me. The path to this moment had been long and fraught, but the sense of reclaiming my own life was overwhelmingly, breathtakingly, worth it. The dispatcher on the other end of the line asked for my address, her voice a model of professional calm. That strangely steadied my own nerves. I provided it clearly, enunciating each word, acutely aware of the 3 pairs of eyes boring into me, a maelstrom of disbelief, outrage, and dawning horror swirling within them. Aaron's, no, Chloe's mouth had literally fallen open, a caricature of shock. My father, Frank, swore under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound of pure fury. My mother, Carol, looked as though I had physically struck her, her face paling, her hand flying to her chest. Lena, she whispered, her voice hoarse, pleading, You're calling the police? On your own family? The question was a desperate attempt to reassert the old rules, the unspoken family code that placed loyalty, however dysfunctional, above all else, especially above my personal boundaries. I asked you to leave my private property, I stated, my voice unwavering, my gaze sweeping over each of them. You refused. The presence of a biological connection does not grant you immunity from the law, nor does it give you the right to occupy my home against my explicit wishes. Chloe's voice, when she finally found it, shook with a potent mixture of rage and panic. This is going to ruin everything, Lena. Do you have any idea what people will think? What they'll say about you? About us? The concern, as always, was for appearances, for the carefully constructed facade of their family image, now threatened by my unprecedented act of self-defense. Yes, Chloe, I do, I replied, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. They'll say I finally learned how to lock my door. They'll say I valued my peace enough to protect it. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'll say it was about time someone in this family demonstrated what healthy boundaries actually look like. My mother blinked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, her voice dropping to something small, wounded. A last-ditch effort to appeal to the daughter she thought she knew. "You used to be so kind, Lena. So compassionate." The words were meant to sting, to reawaken the guilt, the desire to be the good daughter. But the old triggers had lost their power. "And you," I countered, my voice soft but firm, "used to notice when I was hurting, when I was overwhelmed, when your demands were breaking me. Kindness, a mom, is a two-way street, not a one-way obligation I owe to everyone but myself." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, dense, packed with years of unspoken resentments, ignored pleas, and swallowed protests. It was the accumulated weight of every boundary crossed, every manipulative tactic employed, every moment I had said yes, when my entire being screamed no. This silence was the sound of a fundamental shift, the tectonic plates of our family dynamic grinding to a halt and then, irrevocably, realigning. Within 10 minutes, the distinct blue and red flashing lights of a patrol car pulsed through my window, casting fleeting, dramatic shadows on their shocked faces. A uniformed officer, a woman with a calm demeanor and observant eyes, stepped out, her hand resting naturally near her belt. "Good evening," she said, her voice polite but authoritative. "We received a call about a possible trespassing situation?" I nodded, stepping slightly aside to indicate my family still clustered on my doorstep, their luggage a testament to their foiled invasion. "That was me, officer. These individuals are my family members, but they are not residents here, they were not invited, and they have refused my repeated requests to leave my property." The officer's gaze moved from me to my parents, then to Chloe, taking in the scene, the boxes, the tense postures, the palpable anger radiating from them. "Ma'am, sir," she addressed my parents directly, "I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises. This is Ms. Sterling's private residence, and she has the right to determine who is and isn't welcome." "But this is our daughter," my father exclaimed, his voice tight with outrage, as if that fact alone superseded any legal or personal rights I might possess. "And this," the officer replied, her tone unwavering, "is her legally occupied dwelling, which you are not permitted to be in or on without her explicit consent, regardless of your familial relationship." Chloe looked as though she might either burst into tears or start throwing her belongings down the stairs. Perhaps both. Her face was a mask of impotent fury. "You are going to regret this, Lena," she hissed, her voice venomous. "You'll see. You'll end up alone." "No, Chloe," I said, a profound sense of certainty settling over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. "I've regretted almost every decision I made that prioritized your comfort over my own well-being, every time I allowed myself to be guilted into compliance. This is the first decision regarding our family dynamic in a very, very long time that I am absolutely, unequivocally, sure of. This is not the beginning of my regret, it's the end of it." The officer then calmly, but firmly, reiterated her request for them to leave, explaining the potential consequences if they failed to comply. Defeated, humiliated, and seething, they finally began to gather their things, casting glares of pure resentment in my direction. As they retreated down the stairs, the sound of their angry, muttered complaints faded, replaced by the blessed, welcome sound of silence. I closed my door, leaned against it for a moment, and took the deepest, most cleansing breath I had taken in my entire adult life. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your peace and want to share your story of finding strength, please, tell us about it in the comments. Your journey could inspire someone else. The following day, my phone was a relentless barrage of their attempts to re-establish contact, to punish, to guilt. 12 missed calls by noon, 5 from my mother, 2 from my father, the rest from a collection of cousins and distant aunts I hadn't spoken to in years, no doubt conscripted into the campaign of familial pressure. Then came the texts, a tidal wave of guilt and recrimination. "How could you do this to your own sister, Lena? Your mother is beside herself with grief. Chloe had to sleep in her car last night. Is that what you wanted? For your sister to be homeless? Each message was a carefully crafted dart aimed at my conscience. I scrolled through them, a detached observer, the words no longer able to penetrate the armor of my newfound resolve. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been demonstrated by my actions. Then, inevitably, came the public shaming. A Facebook post from my mother, set to a public, naturally, accompanied by a strategically chosen, heart-wrenching photo of Chloe as a cherubic toddler. 3 long paragraphs, punctuated by an excessive number of broken heart emojis, detailing her profound disappointment. "We raised both our daughters to love and care for one another," it read, but sadly, one of them seems to have forgotten the meaning of family in her pursuit of selfish independence. "We are heartbroken that Lena, so successful, so fortunate, would turn her back on us in our time of need. Chloe didn't deserve this. None of us did." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments from people I barely knew, or hadn't seen since high school, calling me cold, selfish, ungrateful, entitled. It was the same old script, just amplified for a wider audience. The narrative they had always spun, now broadcast for the world to see. I stared at the screen for a long time, not with anger, but with a weary sense of resignation. This was their final, desperate move, to control the narrative, to paint me as the villain in a story where they were the perpetual victims. For a moment, I considered letting it go, letting them have their public performance. But then, a different kind of resolve settled in. They had chosen the public arena, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to meet them there, armed not with accusations, but with undeniable facts. Instead of retreating into silence, as they undoubtedly expected, I decided it was time for my own voice to be heard, not in anger, but in the clear, irrefutable language of truth. For the first time in my life, I posted back, not a direct reply to my mother's lament, but a new thread, a carefully curated collection of facts, simple, unadorned, and devastatingly effective. No dramatic flair, no emotional pleas, no hashtags seeking validation. Just the cold, hard evidence of a narrative they had conveniently omitted. I began with a screenshot of the $2,000 bank transfer I'd made years ago to cover their past due mortgage, a transfer for which no gratitude was ever expressed. Next, a scanned copy of the car loan agreement I had co-signed for Chloe, clearly showing my name and financial liability, followed immediately by the subsequent collections notice after she predictably defaulted on the payments, a hit my credit score took silently. Then, I uploaded a redacted photo of the lawyer's invoice from Chloe's DUI case, the one my father had begged me to keep quiet to protect the family's reputation, an expense I had covered in its entirety without a word of thanks from her. I meticulously constructed a timeline, a chronological list of every one-time emergency favor I had been guilted or pressured into agreeing to since I was 21, each entry a small testament to the relentless erosion of my financial and emotional resources. I included the official sales receipt for my old condo, clearly dated weeks before that fateful Sunday dinner, proving my move was not a spontaneous, malicious act, but a premeditated step towards self-preservation. And finally, the piece de resistance, a screenshot of a series of vitriolic text messages Chloe had sent me 2 years prior, during a period when I had refused to let her crash for just a month or two, while she figured things out. In those messages, she called me a boring, heartless robot, and a selfish yuppie with no soul, a stark contrast to the fragile victim my mother was currently portraying to the world. I ended my meticulously documented thread with a single, concise sentence: I did not abandon my family. I simply stopped volunteering to carry the crushing weight of their emotional and financial debt, a debt I never agreed to incur but was always expected to pay. After hitting post, I calmly turned off my phone. Not because I was afraid of the fallout, the inevitable backlash, or the frantic attempts at damage control from my family. I turned it off because I didn't need the applause, nor did I fear the condemnation. I just needed quiet. The kind of profound, soul-deep quiet that comes from finally speaking your truth, from reclaiming your narrative, from severing ties that had become toxic and unsustainable. And for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, I truly had it. The digital storm might rage, but within the four walls of my new, intentionally chosen solitude, there was only peace. That night, the apartment was a haven of stillness. No incessant buzzing from my phone, no anxious anticipation of the next demand, no ghostly echoes of past arguments. Just the gentle, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator, a comforting domestic sound, and the occasional creak of the old building settling around me, like sighs of contentment. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, not because I needed help sleeping. For the first time in months, sleep felt like an attainable luxury, but for the ritual itself. The warmth of the mug cupped in both hands, the fragrant steam rising like a quiet, unasked for forgiveness, not from them, but for myself. Forgiveness for all the years I had allowed my boundaries to be violated, for all the times I had prioritized their comfort over my own sanity. My phone, when I eventually turned it back on much later, lit up twice, almost immediately. One notification from my mother, another from Chloe. I didn't open the messages. I didn't need to. I knew their rhythm by now, the predictable cadence of their emotional repertoire, shock, then anger, then a desperate pivot to guilt, followed by pleading. Always in that precise, manipulative order. With a sense of calm detachment, I blocked both their numbers. Not out of cruelty, not out of pride, but because some doors, once firmly closed, deserve to remain so. Not every knock warrants an answer. Not every plea deserves an audience, especially when those pleas are merely attempts to regain control, to pull you back into a dysfunctional dance you've finally chosen to leave. I walked out onto my small balcony, a feature I hadn't had in my previous, more prestigious apartment. The city air was cool, but not biting, the kind of refreshing chill that reminds you you're alive, that your senses are sharp, that the world continues to turn, full of possibilities beyond the suffocating confines of familial obligation. Below, the city hummed its ceaseless song, a symphony of distant traffic, glowing headlights painting fleeting streaks on the pavement, the silhouette of someone walking a dog in a puffy coat, oblivious to my small, personal revolution. A neighbor, 2 floors down, tending to her window boxes, caught my eye and offered a small, friendly wave. I waved back. It was a simple gesture, almost insignificant, yet it felt more real, more genuinely connecting than most of the interactions I'd had with my own family for years. Back inside, I moved through the apartment, turning off the lights one by one. The living room, with its single, comfortable armchair and a small stack of books. The kitchen, clean and uncluttered. The hallway, bare of the obligatory family photos that had once adorned my walls, not out of a lack of love for the idea of family, but as a conscious choice to curate a space that reflected my present, not my past obligations. There were no ghosts here, no lingering shadows of expectation. I didn't feel triumphant, or bitter, or even particularly vindicated. I just felt done. Done performing the role of the ever-capable daughter, done explaining my choices, done being the emergency emotional support system for people who consistently refuse to learn how to manage their own lives. Somewhere out there, I knew they were already rewriting the story, recasting me in the role that best suited their narrative, the villain, the cold-hearted one, the ungrateful child who had inexplicably turned her back on their unwavering love and support. Let them. My journey hadn't been about seeking their approval or even their understanding. It had been about finding my own. I didn't vanish from their lives in a puff of smoke. They simply continued to tell the story as if I had, conveniently omitting the chapters where I had been present, supportive, and endlessly accommodating, until I could be so no longer. And now, finally, I had written my own ending, an ending where I walked away, not into oblivion, but into the quiet, self-determined light of my own life. If my story has resonated with you, if you've found yourself nodding along, perhaps it's a sign to take that first step towards your own peace. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quietude I hadn't realized I was so starved for. Mornings began not with a jolt of anxiety at a ringing phone, but with the gentle intrusion of sunlight through my new bedroom window, unfiltered by the heavy drapes I once used to block out a world I felt was always encroaching. I rediscovered small, forgotten joys, lingering over a second cup of coffee, reading an entire chapter of a book uninterrupted, taking long, aimless walks through unfamiliar streets, noticing the intricate ironwork on an old gate or the vibrant mural on a previously unseen wall. These were not grand adventures, but tiny acts of reclamation, each one a quiet affirmation that my time, my attention, my energy, were finally, blessedly, my own to direct. The absence of their drama was not an empty void, but a spacious, fertile ground where my own thoughts and desires could finally take root and breathe. There was, of course, a silence from their end, a profound and uncharacteristic lack of communication. After the initial flurry of outrage and the digital denouement, it wasn't the peaceful silence I now cultivated, but a heavy, loaded one, likely filled with indignation and plotting, or perhaps, a grudging, temporary retreat. I didn't dwell on it. I had spent too many years trying to decipher their silences, to anticipate their moods, to preempt their demands. Now, their silence was simply their own affair, a distant storm that no longer had the power to disrupt my forecast. I had built my breakwater, and it was holding firm. The phantom limb of familial obligation still twinged occasionally, a conditioned reflex from decades of enmeshment, but it was fading, replaced by the growing strength of my own self-regard. What surprised me most was not the peace, but the subtle, internal shifts that peace engendered. A newfound clarity of thought, a deeper well of patience for the small, everyday frustrations that life inevitably brings. I found myself more open, more present in my interactions with colleagues, with the barista at my new local coffee shop, even with the friendly neighbor whose wave had felt like such a beacon. It was as if, by removing the constant drain of my family's needs, I had uncovered a reservoir of emotional energy I hadn't known I possessed. My world, once constricted by their expectations, began to expand in small, meaningful ways. I started exploring hobbies I'd long put aside, sketching in a notebook I found tucked away, visiting small art galleries on Saturday afternoons, simply because I could. This journey hadn't been about inflicting pain or seeking revenge, though I knew they would likely frame it that way. It was about an elemental act of survival, like a plant finally turning itself towards the sun after being kept too long in the shade. The decisions I made, selling the condo, the silence, the call to the authorities, the public rebuttal, were not born of malice, but of a desperate, finally heated instinct for self-preservation. It was the culmination of a slow, painful awakening to the reality that I could not change them, I could only change my response to them, my participation in the toxic dance we had performed for far too long. And sometimes, changing your response means walking away from the dance floor altogether. The truth is, establishing boundaries with people who are committed to misunderstanding you is an ongoing practice, not a one-time fix. I knew there might be future attempts, new tactics, perhaps even ambushes at holidays or other family occasions I might, in a moment of optimistic forgetfulness, choose to attend. But something fundamental had shifted within me. The fear of their disapproval, the ingrained guilt, had lost its sharpest teeth. I had faced their worst, their public condemnation, their private fury, and I had not only survived, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The world didn't end. My life didn't crumble. Instead, it began to blossom in the space I had cleared. I often think back to that young woman who co-signed loans she couldn't afford, who wired money she desperately needed, who cleaned up messes that weren't hers, all in the name of being the good daughter, the strong sister. I don't feel anger towards her anymore, only a profound compassion. She was doing the best she could with the tools and understanding she had at the time. But she deserved better. She deserved to be seen, to be valued for who she was, not just for what she could provide. And in finally standing up for myself, I was, in a way, standing up for her too, giving her the validation and protection she had always craved, but never received from those she sought it from most. My story, I realize, is not unique. Many walk this tightrope of familial duty and personal well-being, often sacrificing the latter for a semblance of the former. But my hope, in sharing this, is that it serves as a quiet reminder that your peace is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Your boundaries are not acts of aggression, but declarations of self-worth. You are the author of your own life, and you have the absolute right to edit out the characters and plot lines that bring you relentless pain and diminish your spirit. My narrative found its new, true beginning when I finally gathered the courage To write it, not according to their script, but from the depths of my own reclaimed voice. What chapter are you ready to write for yourself, in your own authentic words? Share your thoughts in the comments below on what reclaiming your narrative, your peace, or your power truly means to you. Your voice, your story, it matters profoundly. Weeks have now turned into months, and the quiet rhythm I established has become my new normal, a baseline of serenity against which the former chaos of my life seems like a distant, almost surreal memory. There have been no further direct confrontations, no more dramatic doorstep appearances. The digital silence from their side has largely held, punctuated only by the occasional, indirect barb I hear through the grapevine of extended family. Whispers of my betrayal, or my coldness, narratives they continue to spin to anyone who will listen. It no longer affects me. Their words are like arrows shot from a great distance, losing their velocity, their power to wound, long before they reach the calm shores of my new reality. I've learned that you cannot control the stories others tell about you, but you can control whether you allow those stories to define you or to inhabit your peace. My small apartment, once chosen as a refuge, has truly become a home. It's filled not with expensive things, but with things that bring me joy, books that invite contemplation, art supplies that beckon creativity, the scent of fresh flowers from the farmer's market I now frequent with a light heart. The balcony is my favorite spot, a place where I watch the city awaken with my morning coffee and unwind as the lights twinkle to life in the evening. It's a simple existence, perhaps, by some standards, but it is rich in what truly matters. Autonomy, peace, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I am safe and secure in my own space, by my own design. I still see that friendly neighbor from 2 floors down. We've exchanged more than waves now, a shared laugh over a misdelivered package, a quick chat about the unseasonable weather. Small connections, genuine and unforced, a reminder that human interaction doesn't have to be fraught with obligation or hidden agendas. These are the threads from which I am slowly weaving a new tapestry of community, one based on mutual respect and simple kindness, rather than enmeshed histories and unspoken demands. It's a slower, more deliberate process, but infinitely more rewarding. The most profound change, however, has been internal. The constant low hum of anxiety that used to be the background music of my life has faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I make decisions more easily, trust my own judgment more readily, and no longer second-guess my right to say no when something doesn't align with my well-being or my values. I've learned that being the strong one doesn't mean endlessly absorbing the burdens of others. It means having the strength to define your own limits, to protect your own energy, and to build a life that nurtures your soul, even if that means disappointing those who have grown accustomed to your boundless utility. This journey of reclaiming my life wasn't about achieving a dramatic, Hollywood-style victory. There were no grand pronouncements, no tearful reconciliations where everyone suddenly understood and repented. It was, and continues to be, a quieter, more personal revolution, the slow, steady work of dismantling old patterns, healing old wounds, and courageously, consistently, choosing myself. It's about understanding that self-care isn't selfish, it's the fundamental act of honoring the life you've been given. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for people who refuse to change, and for yourself, is to gently, but firmly, remove yourself from their orbit, allowing them the space to finally confront the consequences of their own choices, without you as their perennial safety net. I don't know what the future holds regarding my family. Perhaps one day, genuine change will occur on their part, leading to a possibility of a different, healthier kind of connection. Or perhaps not. What I do know is that my well-being is no longer contingent on their approval, their understanding, or their presence in my life under the old terms. I have found a peace that is mine, built on the solid foundation of self-respect and clear boundaries. And that, I've discovered, is more valuable than any inherited obligation or socially prescribed notion of familial duty. I came here, to this new chapter, not to be loved by them in the way they defined it, but to finally, truly, love and honor myself. And in that, I have found a liberation more profound than I ever imagined possible. My story isn't over, it's simply being written on my own terms now, one peaceful, intentional day at a time. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this journey. And remember, your story is yours to write, too.